Have you ever received a phishing email and wondered where it came from? Or maybe your SOC is in charge of triaging reported phishing for your entire organization. Many blue teams are, which makes this a key skill for any cyber defender. Oftentimes it's pretty easy to tell if an email is malicious or not, but sometimes it's a little bit more difficult, and sometimes you have to look at the headers to maybe get a clue as to whether something might be malicious or whether it's just a marketing or spam email. But often even the headers are really confusing. Which fields matter? How do you know if it's a spoofed email or not? Today we're going to be tackling how email works and which fields you need to look at to get the quickest answers for triaging spam. All that and more today on the 12 Days of Cyber Defense. Hello everyone, welcome back. It's John Hubbard bringing you 12 days of cyber defense tips and tricks. Today we're going to talk about email, and I want to start off with a quick refresher on some of the terminology and the way that email works as an email gets sent across the internet. So, quickly referring to this drawing I've crafted up here, we have an email sender that's going to be sending from one laptop to the receiver laptop over on this side at a different organization. When you send an email, you are going to type it up in what is referred to in the SMTP standards as an MUA, or a mail user agent, and it's going to go from your machine to another server, the first server that it gets handed to, an MTA. There are going to be at least two MTAs involved, one for your organization and one for the receiving organization, which I'm just pretending is Microsoft in this example. So you hit send on your email, and it goes to maybe your organization's MTA, another internal MTA, and then finally a border MTA where it connects over the internet to the receiving organization's MTA, which then accepts that email, and then it furthers it, continuing through the infrastructure until it finally hits an MDA, a mail delivery agent, which then the final receiver is going to query and say, hey, do I have any new email? And they're going to check their inbox and see that they have that new message. Those acronyms aren't super important, but I wanted to point them out because you may see them, and sometimes it can get confusing because they're all so similar. The key players in an email's path across the internet is the first time your organization sees an email, in this case I have it labeled as Microsoft, and the server that is sending that email directly to the receiving server. So whatever is making this connection right here across the internet, the final IP address of this machine that's passing that email in. This can be, and most of the time is, a legitimate email server, but sometimes it could be an attacker trying to spoof an email. You're going to see how that comes back later on in this lesson. So this is how email works, and keep this in your head as we continue on from here. Okay, before we dive into headers, I want to give a quick example of how the SMTP protocol works and how it allows spoofing email really, really easily. SMTP was designed in the 1980s before there was any kind of notion of the need for email security, and so it's very easy to craft a spoofed email and introduce it into the email stream. Just because you make the email and pass it across the internet doesn't mean the receiver is going to receive it. Spam filters might stop it. But initially, typing out that email and hitting send is very, very easy to do. And it's on the receiving organization's side as to whether that email is going to land in someone's inbox or not, depending on the spam controls they have. So here's what we're going to do. We have in this virtual machine that I'm running here a web service that's going to be accepting email over SMTP, and I'm going to manually type all the SMTP commands that it would take to send an email. I'm pretending to be one of those MTAs, kind of as you type the email and you hit send, as it gets introduced to that successive line of MTAs that bounces it across the internet. This is kind of the first step as you type out that email. I'm going to pretend to send an email as if I am Jeff Bezos, and you're going to see how easy this sort of thing is to do. So I'm going to type telnet localhost 25, where my email server is listening, and I'm going to say HELO Amazon.com. This is just kind of a keyword that's used as part of the SMTP protocol. EHLO is another one you might see. It's going to say hello Amazon.com. It doesn't question that. It just accepts and says, okay, go on. I'm going to say mail from Jeff Bezos at Amazon.com. It says, okay, go on. Receipt to, who am I sending this email to? We are going to be sending it to John at myorg.com. Great, okay, fine. This is what you do to create what is called the envelope of the email. After that, you type data, and now we're working on the inside content of the email. It's kind of like physical mail, where you can send an envelope and write a to and a from on the outside, and then there can be different stuff on the inside. Now what I'm going to do on the inside is this. I'm going to type to again, and I'm going to type john@myorg.com, and then I'm going to fill in the from line, Jeff B. I'm going to say Jeff.Bezos2, we'll see where that comes back later, at amazon.com. And then I'm going to enter on that, and I'm going to make a subject for the email, link for you. All right. Remember, this is what your email client's doing, is you type an email into the normal interface and then you hit send. It kind of does this on the back end. So here's our email. All right, here we go. So when we get to the end of the email, we have to type a dot. That's our signifier to the server that that's the end of the email. So we hit enter on that. It says, okay, you sent the email. Great. I disconnect from sending the email. Boom, connection is closed. Whoa, look at that. We've received a new email. I wonder who it's from. Well, here we go. Jeff B sent an email that says link for you. Notice it says Jeff B, jeff.bezos2@amazon.com. Now this was what I typed in the second time I typed where the email came from here, Jeff Bezos2. And here's our email as you would normally see it. You look at the headers for the email, however, and you can see slightly different stuff. There is a received line that says where this came from. And notice whatever I type in the EHLO or the HELO, whatever you type first, the connecting server identifies itself, and whatever it identifies itself as goes right here on the received line after the word from. So we said we were Amazon.com, so it fills it in, and it says received from Amazon by Mailhog, and the return path is the first from address I typed in, which is this one that was up here. This is an interesting thing to note because sometimes you see emails that come in that have a different from address on the envelope portion than on the inside of the email. Your email client, if you open this in Gmail or Outlook or anything, is going to show that second from address right here. But if you want to see that first from address, the envelope from, you actually have to look into the return path field inside your email headers. And so this is how the fields that get typed kind of in the back end in SMTP protocol convert into the headers that you will see that are actually printed inside the email when you look at the source. Now, with that in mind, let's take a look at a real spam email that I received. So what I have is an example of an email that I received, which was a true phishing email. This just came in to one of my work accounts, and you can see there's a very suspicious view document with a bunch of dashes in it and a link that goes out. This email, when you save it off to like your desktop, it would go to a MSG file. And I took that MSG file and I moved it into Remnix, like you might do if you were trying to dive into the contents of an email in a Linux environment because you didn't want to mess with it on your actual machine, which of course you don't if it has malicious attachments. So in this folder, I have new document received.msg. The first step is, because you can't really work with an MSG file very easily, convert it to a different format, which is an EML file. So what we can do is we can use the tool that's built into Remnix, message convert, and give it the file. And that's really all you have to do. Now we have new document received.eml. Easy conversion, right? This we can read as a plain text document. There we go, headers and everything. Now what I'm going to do is this. Although the headers are in there, they kind of get jumbled in order in this email conversion step. So I'm going to take the original headers out of the email and I'm going to put them into a separate text document so that we can talk about them in kind of a clean way. So to do that, I'm going to bring up my original email again. And I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Properties. And I'm going to take this information, hit Control A to select it all. I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code and just hit paste. And here we have all of the headers, and I have a plugin installed here that just parses out EML files so that it kind of highlights the keywords that we're looking for. So we can start here. All right, so here we have the headers in a clean format straight out of Microsoft Outlook. Now I'm going to gloss over some of the details here because we don't have time to go into a really extended explanation of this. So we're going to focus on a couple different header lines, the most important ones. That is the received headers and the received SPF headers, which are going to tell us if the email is likely spoofed or not. The received headers tell us where the email has been. It should tell us backwards chronologically every single MTA that thing touched. So in this case, this first item right here should be this last step before the email got to us. The next received line here should be the next item back, and then so on, all the way down to where the very first received header, if you scroll down to where the to and the from and the subject start showing up, this very first one here in a normal email would be this hop right here. And it may actually contain the real IP address of the user depending on how they sent the email. If they sent it from like Thunderbird, you would have their real IP, assuming they weren't trying to hide it. If you sent it through Gmail, it would not be the real IP. It would be the IP of a Gmail web server or whatever. What we're going to do with this header is we're going to simplify it. And I'm going to start from the top and we're going to look only for received lines or received SPF lines, and we're going to try to make some sense of this. First step, just scan through all the received lines and see where it stops just being from Microsoft to Microsoft. So that's Outlook to Outlook. That's not very exciting. I'm going to highlight this so we can see them all. Outlook to Outlook, Outlook to Office 365, and we have Outlook to Outlook, and Outlook to Outlook, Outlook to Office 365, and then here we go. Now we can see a line where it's from Claus Michael Kuhn to mailprotectionoutlook.com. So I'm just going to basically take everything above this and just delete it so that it's easy for us to look at the details here. This is the step where this email left the sender's hands, or at least who the sender claimed to be, and then entered trustable infrastructure. So this is the last line in all of the headers that we can actually believe in. And maybe this one right here as well, the return path, right? That's that envelope from address. Everything below here is suspect. So we look at this. This is the IP address that we can trust. There was a TCP connection that was made. It cannot be spoofed. That is the IP address of whoever sent that email over the internet and passed it to Microsoft. It connected to our server and identified itself as clausmichaelkuhn.com, which is interesting because the email itself, when you look at the return path, that first from address that we typed in this terminal right here, in our case, they claimed was refreshroof.com. And then when you look at the actual content of the email here, it claims to be campaignTech@campaignsанdelections.com. So the message of the email says it's from campaignsанdelections.com. The envelope of the email says it's from refreshroof.com. And the server that connected claims to be clausmichaelkuhn.com. So right off the bat, none of this really makes any sense. And if those things don't line up, you have a really good chance that this thing is spoofing. Well, we can then turn our attention to the SPF check. And an SPF check is something that is, it stands for Sender Policy Framework. And it's basically a very simple way for organizations receiving email to know if those emails are spoofed. How it works is every company can publish an SPF record in their DNS logs. And this is how that works. Let's say you want to send an email to SANS. SANS will publish a text record in their DNS records that will list this right here. And so this is basically a way SPF can, IP addresses and hosts can be checked to say like, did this email come from a place that SANS says they send email from? Now this one is more complex. Oftentimes it can just be an IP address, or it can just be a host name that gets translated into an IP address. We're not going to go into what all of this means. But largely it's basically saying this is where you should expect us to send email from. And so when we read this header, received SPF, it says fail because refreshroof.com was checked. Let's say dig text refreshroof.com. Is there an SPF record? Well, yes. Basically, they are an organization that apparently uses Outlook.com for email. Okay, so if you look up the IP address of this, would it turn into this IP right here? If not, this is probably a spoofed email. And in this case, that check failed, so it did not. And so this is something that would probably land in a junk box, and it did for me. So what it's saying is this: Outlook received an email. That email claimed, at least in one of 3 places, to be from refreshroof.com, and the place that's checked is what is typed in that envelope from line. It checked Refresh Roof's DNS record, and it said, hey, Refresh Roof, do you send email from this IP that actually connected us and sent us an email that claimed to be from you? And the answer was no, which means this email was very likely spoofed. And so that's how we can very quickly look at some of these headers and determine where the email went and if it's likely spoofed or not. Now, to close this up, I want to say one final thing, and something that you often see in emails like this. We mentioned that this is the last thing that we can trust. Everything below this line might be wrong and kind of false. So if we look at some of these things, sometimes they don't make sense. Here's an example of when they don't make sense. Look at when this hit Microsoft. Sunday, the 22nd of November, roughly midnight. We look at this entry, which is the one before that, and it was the 20th of November around noon. Was this email bouncing around the internet for 36 hours? Probably not, right? And so this may have been the spammer trying to fill in fake headers that say, oh, this email passed a bunch of stuff. Look, Google said it was okay. I don't know if that's actually what was going on. That's my best guess here. It's usually not worth digging too far into this because oftentimes spammers play different games. You're looking for the stuff written by your own infrastructure and the checks that it ran. Below this, just don't trust it. And so we have some date discrepancies here, and we have some other stuff not matching up, like where the email is coming from, which all adds up to basically saying this email is spoofed, and when an email is spoofed, it's almost certainly bad. What about when an email is not spoofed? If all of these things pass, the headers are pristine, does the email necessarily contain a safe message? No, it does not, right? Just because it's not spoofed does not mean it's safe. Someone's email account can get compromised, and someone can send malware with a real email account. This is an attacker pretending to be, I don't know what, 3 different things, I guess. And when that's the case, it's almost certainly bad. But when it's not the case, it doesn't mean the email's good. So just remember that. But this is a useful way of just kind of getting a quick check as to what's going on, where the email came from as an IP address. If you're continuously getting spammed from an IP like this, you could use this as a way of blocking this as a source of email if they're continuously giving you phishing emails or whatever. And so that's how you can take apart the headers of the email. We can also look at the content of the email and look at the files and the things that were attached and take it from that angle as well. Now, this email is now in EML format. And if we use a program like EML dump, we can give it the name of the email. And it says there are 2 pieces to this email. There is a text portion and there is an RTF attachment to this email. So let's say we want to look at that RTF and dump it out. EML dump makes this very easy to do. We can do this and then S for select, and we're selecting item number 3, which is that right there. So select 3, D for actually do the dump, otherwise it won't, it'll just display it to the screen. And then we have this here. That is the actual file. So this is the RTF file, prints it out to the screen. We don't want to print it out to the screen. We want to write it out to an actual file that we can examine. So let's say file.rtf. Boom. We have now extracted the attachment from the email, and it is called file RTF. And from here, I just installed a little RTF reader called AbiWord, and I can open it like this, and here's what our attachment looked like. Basically, it is a super lame kind of OneDrive phishing thing, view document, you mouse over it, and it would take you to what appears to be proghosttech.com/wpadmin user JSS OT1, and then my email address that I was responsible for that received this actual phishing email. So that is how you can extract the files from a MSG file. You take the MSG, you convert it to an EML, you take the EML, and then you run EML dump, and you can extract whatever files are attached to it. And if you have an RTF, you can open it up in one of those tools in Linux, or you can do whatever you need to do with what's beyond that. So there you have it, a multi-part explanation of how email traverses the internet, the key steps that it goes through as it goes from either a spoofer of sending that email or a legitimate sender, enters your infrastructure, and then from there is leaving a mark with received headers all along the way. When that email is received by your server, it is on your server to then run those SPF checks or DKIM or DMARC, which are the two other standards we didn't have time to talk about today, and make sure that that email was not spoofed. As you can see, anyone can type "this email is from anyone on earth" to any server. And if that server doesn't do some double checking to reject it or put it in a junk email box, it's just going to accept it and bring it right on through. And so that's some of the dangers we're dealing with here. So that is how you can take an email from Windows in Outlook, dump it into an MSG file, take the MSG file, convert it into an EML file, take the EML file, and then break it up into the attachments versus the text versus the headers, look at the headers, parse it into the received lines, find the received line that matters, look at the key details like who the server claimed to be, what the envelope from was versus the content from, and then what is the IP address that actually sent that email. And so you can block it if it needs to be blocked. So hopefully these tactics and techniques were useful to you. Like I said, this is a key part of the job for many, many SOCs around the world. Again, if you're interested in going deeper on this stuff, we have the Sec 450 class where I have a whole lab and section where we're writing and sending spoofed emails and looking at more details on each of the headers and all the key fields within them. But I wanted to talk about some of those key items here in this video today because it's such an important topic for all blue teamers to know. Thank you for joining me today and hope to see you on the next episode of the 12 Days of Defense. See you later.